Honey.
Hello.
Well, I like your background.
That's the logo of the association. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. Thanks, honey. I'm all right. What do you think the attendance is going to be tonight?
Okay, so people who registered are 90 something.
90 people.
90, yes.
90. Why are there so many?
I don't know. People are interested, but I doubt if all this number will attend. We usually get a lot of registrants, but usually 1/3 only attends.
How many?
1/3.
1/3. No, that's fine. Yeah, 30 is fine. Yeah, that's a number I thought I'd be catering for.
Hello, everyone. How are you?
Oh. Hello.
Who
Yes.
is him? Is that Osama?
It is, yes, yeah, it's me. Yeah.
Osama. David, this is Dr. Osama. Osama is a pediatric consultant in Ireland. He is holding the media and communication office in our association. David is online with us, Osama.
Thank you very much, David, for everything. Thank you for the effort as you made.
Oh, that's fine. No problem at all.
I hope today it's going to be fine from the IT point of view. I'm here for support. And I have admitted Mohammed Usman. Mohammed Usman will be moderating the lecture today.
Okay.
I'm just going to make him a co-host.
Okay.
Who a co-host?
Mohammed Usman
and David as well. Make him a co-host.
David yeah, make me a co-host. I need to have the power.
Yes, of course.
You have all the power tonight.
5 people have entered the waiting room.
So, David, we are recording these in our clouds, but we usually what we do as well. That's we have a Facebook page called PSAPCH. So it's going to be live on that page if it's okay with you.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, and the recording will be there in the it's usually accessible by the Sudanese pediatric trainees in the UK and in Sudan.
Yeah.
So, that's what we're going to do. Muhammad Usman, are you here? Muhammad Abdurrahman, can you hear us? Our moderator, I admitted him.
Oh, yes, I can hear you very well.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for.
Where is your camera, Muhammad?
Honestly, Dr. Hani, I have a really big problem with my camera.
Because I can't see the icon for your camera also.
That's okay. You know, he's moderating, so it doesn't need to be show his face or anything. Even though he's a good-looking man, but you know. So, David, do you have your talk, your presentation there?
Yes, I do. Yeah. I've got it.
Do you want to try?
So why don't you share it now?
I'll share the screen. Yeah, share the screen.
Test it.
This one, isn't it? That one. You see it?
Yeah, perfect.
Brilliant. Yes.
Hold on, let me make sure that I can. Oh yeah, there we are. Yeah.
Yes, it's moving. It's moving.
It's moving. Yeah, it's all is well. All is well.
So what we're going to do is that we have 6 waiting in the waiting room, so we were not going to admit before 8 o'clock. What we're going to do is that Muhammad is going to say a welcome talk, and then he will give the floor to Hani. Hani will present David and his bio. And then, David, how long your lecture is going to be?
I think it's probably going to be about half an hour to kind of 40 minutes, probably.
40 minutes. So we'll give you 40 minutes. So we'll say that we have 40 minutes, and then The total time is between an hour to and a half an hour with the question. So that's okay, Muhammad. Can you hear us? Muhammad, he is.
So we will just ask people if they have questions while the session is going on to put them in the chat, and we will read them at the end. And if someone wants to ask a complicated question verbally, that's fine at the end also. But they're not going to disturb you during the session.
That's fine, honey. I don't mind. I don't mind taking questions as we go along, but give them all at the end. That's absolutely fine as well.
Muhammad, do you have 2 accounts in?
No, only one account.
So who's the other Muhammad Usman?
I'm Muhammad Usman.
Muhammad Abdurrahman, I mean, sorry.
Muhammad.
All right, we have admitted Muhammad Usman. I thought he's Muhammad Abdurrahman, but it's okay. So you can wait with us until we start. Muhammad Usman, welcome.
Okay.
Usama, you are going to do the live button later on, right?
Yeah, when we are up and running and starting the actual lecture itself, like the actual presentation, so on. It's not now.
Yes.
I'll prepare for it now.
What's the time now?
Still, we have 5 minutes.
I just feel يعني 2 minutes before the start, if we start adding people, I know it might take time, ولا شنو?
No, I'll admit them all at one time. There is no.
Oh yeah, you can just hit one button. So I didn't see that.
Yeah.
You've been working today, David, or off?
Honey, I've been off today.
I can see that you feel very relaxed. You look
Relaxed, yeah, chilled out. Word for weekend.
relaxed.
How's PICE?
Still having a feel. I only did 3 day shifts during on HTU and then 3 nights on, everywhere. But it was good. No crash call at all.
Good.
So will you pause David, you'll pause the sharing, and then we can start the sharing again when we are ready.
Yeah.
We'll stop the sharing for now.
Stop the sharing for now, yeah.
في introductory video يا أسامة. Are you going to share that ولا?
Which one?
The one with the logo at the start.
Send it to me, so I'll.
قاعد في الدرايف. دقيقة خلينا نشوف لك. اللي بتيجي فيه واللي بتيجي الكيوبس collecting من حتة كلها بتيجي مرصقة مع بعض ذاك.
Send it to me in WhatsApp.
طيب دقيقة.
So where is it in the drive? So I'll go in the drive now.
لو خشيت في media files.
And then
videos.
تلقى
مكتوب عليه video intro. مرة على بيكون قبل كده.
Yes, yeah, I've seen it before.
ما فيه حاجة، هو بس it just shows the logo and
Very short.
yes. It is just meant to be like a flavoring thing or but nothing.
That's okay. I'm not sure because it's very short, and then we have takes a time to share video and to stop the sharing.
لا 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 على راحتك. It's okay.
I think
It
we
was
did.
just
Okay, have 1 minute and then we'll admit everyone. We have 8 waiting, so we can admit and start. Then okay, so I start admitting.
good.
Yeah, so people are turning out. Okay, so we have 15 participants, and I think we can go ahead now. We can start. I'll keep admitting people as they arrive.
Okay. Good evening, everybody.
Just 1 second, Muhammad, if you don't mind. Let me do the live on the Facebook. Very unusual. I don't see the live. Is it because we are recording? I don't think that should be a problem, Hani.
No, it shouldn't.
I don't see the live option.
If you click on more,
Yeah, it's in more. There is chat, pause recording, stop recording, breakout room.
is it because I am the host? I can do it from here.
Okay.
I can see it. Okay. Just a second.
Will you give me the host?
Yes, it is better actually, the Giga.
Give me the host. Sorry, people will be just preparing the live in.
You've got it.
All right. Okay. Now I can do.
Okay, good evening, everybody.
Just 1 second. Just hold on.
Let
Because
me see.
it takes just 1 minute to. Don't redirect them there. Now. All right. Thank you. You can go ahead now.
Okay. Just I'll mute it there in the Facebook. Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome, everybody. We are delighted here in the British Sudanese Association of Pediatric and Child Health, BSABCH, to meet you in this lecture about publishing or perishing. The lecture will be presented by Dr. David King and expected to take a duration of 1.5 hours. including question and answers at the end. You may send your questions in the chat, or you might have the chance to ask them directly at the end. Now I'd like to invite Dr. Hani Gway. Hani is an ST7 pediatric trainee and the Vice President of the Association. Welcome, Dr. King. The floor is yours, Hani.
Thank you, Mohammed. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Publishing or Perishing presentation by the BSAPCH today. It's a pleasure to introduce my colleague and Registrar David King, who is an ST8 Pediatric Oncology Grid trainee. David is a very enthusiastic trainee about publication and evidence-based medicine. He's done a PhD. He has got a decent number of publications, articles, and reviews, and he's interested in neuro-oncology. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen, if that's all right. Let's see. What's this one? Was it this one? Was it this one? Was it this one? It is this one. Hope everybody can see that. Let me know if there's any problems. Yeah, so Hani asked me to do this this talk, which I'm very happy to give. I think it's probably going to take about 40 minutes, so I'm not sure it'll last an hour and a half in total. I'm very happy to have any questions or anything about any discussions afterwards. And as Hani says, so I did a PhD a few years ago. I've published a variety of articles over the years, and so I do know a little bit about publications and how to get published. So I thought I'd share some thoughts with you today. All right, let's see where we can get this to work first of all. Right, let's go. So the first question is why bother publishing at all? And I think that's an entirely valid question to have, really, because we're all busy clinicians. We're all all busy at work. We've all got busy personal lives, family lives, and publishing is like an extra thing. And what you certainly don't need to do, I don't think, is you don't need to publish to be a good doctor. That's definitely not the case. So the question is, why bother? Why bother at all? So I think the first thing is to benefit your career. And I think, most people who are attending this talk today, that's probably one of the main kind of motivators to get published. So it's almost always a box, certainly in the British training system, there's always a box in application forms, and there's usually a box for publications. And that's true, that's true when you apply for pediatrics initially, and it's definitely true when you apply for subspecialty pediatrics. And so I applied and was appointed to a grid post, and getting published definitely helped, or having publications definitely helped with that. And then again, when you apply for consultant jobs, again, it's something which is always talked about, and it's something you should always aim to have. So to benefit your career, definitely, that is definitely a strong motivator. And I think maybe you could argue the strongest motivator for most people to get published. And then another reason is just to tell people something, to communicate something, and that might be some data you've got. So you might have done a clinical trial, or you might have done a basic lab science project, and you want to tell people about that and get it out there. And so that's a pretty obvious reason to publish. And if you do a project and you don't write it up, then the only people who know about it are you and maybe the department you present it to, an audit or whatever, but actually the wider world will not see it, which is a shame because you do all that work. And then another reason is because you've got something to say, and you might think, well, what does that mean? And what it means is there's loads of opinion pieces and editorials and things like that. For example, with regards to COVID and opening schools, closing schools, there wasn't a great deal of evidence about that, but people still had a lot of things to say about it, and people were writing editorials in BMJ, and people write editorials in archives and putting their point of view across. And so it might be that you think, I want to make a point about something, and one of the best ways to do that and get that out there is to publish it in medical literature. And then lastly, to build a reputation. And so if you're, you can be an excellent doctor, you could be a great doctor on, in the hospitals where you work, but the only people really who are going to know about that are the people you work with and the patients you treat. But down the road, in the hospital down the road, they might not have heard of you. Down the, in another country, they might not have heard of you. Whereas if you publish, then people will be like, oh, Hanny, he's published something. I know Hanny, I know that name. He must be, he's good for whatever. And there's quite a few doctors who I know around the country. I've never worked with them, but I know their name, and I think highly of them because I know that they are interested in research and are publishing stuff. So you can have a reputation, a local reputation, but if you want a national reputation or an international reputation, the reality is you have to publish. And then this is more specific to academia, but if you want to do, what would be termed, I suppose, proper research, so funded research, and you want to have time in your career to do that, then you almost always need money to do it. Money and time. Those are the two big things you need to do research, I think. And so the way to get money is to write grants. Usually, it's unlikely, certainly in the United Kingdom, that you'll get time in your job plan to do research unless you have grant income. And the only, one of the biggest determinants of whether or not you'll be successful in a grant is your publication record and how much you've published before and what sort of journals you've published in. And so that's really important. And then if you are an academic, this doesn't really apply to most clinicians, but if you're an academic, if you want to keep your job, and so let's say you're a clinical academic and you were working at the University of Sheffield, you were doing 50-50, 50% clinical, 50% academic, then in order to keep your job, you'll be performance managed, and part of that performance management would be expecting to have a certain number of publications a year, well, in a 3-year cycle usually, actually, and a certain number of those publications need to be good quality, high impact publications. And if you don't do that, even as a clinical academic, then you'll find yourself in most universities in the UK, you'll find yourself in a little bit of trouble, and you might have to start justifying why they should keep you on. So how do you get published? That is a big question, isn't it? That's probably what most people who are listening to this talk are thinking. It's going to benefit my career. How do I do it? And I've got a few simple rules which I stick to, and I advise people who are starting out on their publishing career, who haven't published much before. I'd say there's 3 rules to be aware of. So the first thing, and it sounds obvious, doesn't it? But your chances of getting a publication are significantly increased if you submit something. Significantly increased. And that's a really obvious thing to say, isn't it? But I think what a lot of people do, certainly in my experience in my country, then you get a lot of juniors and they'll be kind of collecting data and they'll be doing audits, and then there'll be a little bit of chat in the background about getting this published at some point in the future. And usually, because people don't have any experience in publishing, they'll expect somebody else to do it. So a consultant or whoever's in charge, a primary investigator for a research project or whatever it is they're doing, will be like, oh, we might be able to get this published. And then the junior will think that's going to get published, but they don't actually do anything about it. They won't write it up, and they certainly won't be submitting it. They'll expect somebody else to do it. And my experience of that is that those sorts of things don't tend to get published. It's very unusual, in my experience, to get a publication if you haven't been involved in doing it personally and submitting it. It's like occasionally it happens, occasionally somebody will stick your name on something because you collected a bit of data or something, but most of the time it doesn't happen. So yeah, you need to submit something if you get published. And then another saying I like to say is this is Sheryl Sandberg, she's the chief executive of Facebook. She did a good job with them. And one of her sayings was better done than perfect. And I think that is very true when it comes to publishing, because what a lot of people do is they'll have something and they'll be like, oh, you know, we could publish this, and then it'll go round and round and round and multiple email chains, people looking at it, adding things and taking away, and oh, should we think about submitting it here? Should we think about submitting it there? And they want it to be brilliant. And actually, all you need to do is submit it and let the peer reviewers decide whether it's brilliant or not. Because chances are they'll have different ideas as to what is needed than you will. And I always say, don't try and peer review your own work, let the peer reviewers do it. Because otherwise you've got twice as much work to do instead of half as much work. And then the last one, it's a bit like coming back to a first point, is don't rely on anyone but yourself. So, you know, chances are people aren't going to go above and beyond to publish stuff on your behalf. They're going to put you first, definitely. And so you do need to take a bit of ownership in getting published. You can't expect people to give you projects. You can't expect people to give you articles to write necessarily. Some people will. But if they do, they might just say, oh, I've got this idea for an article, and then you'll have to go away and do the vast majority of work on it. So unfortunately, when it comes to publishing, in my experience, you have to do it yourself. You have to do most of the work yourself. So what can you publish? Well, the good news is just about anything. So there's, in 2006, and this will have increased since then, I promise you, 1.34 million journal articles and 24,000 journals in 2006. You think, oh, why is it so hard? Sometimes I wonder, when my papers are going around multiple journals getting rejected from multiple places, how on earth can it not be accepted when they need content, clearly? But yeah, so just about anything you can get published. So what does that mean? So you can publish case reports, and that's pretty easy. That's a good starting point. If you haven't published anything before, you might think, you know, I'm going to write a little case report up. I think the problem with case reports is the saying about case reports, and that's everyone wants to publish them and no one wants to read them. And I think the editors are aware of that. So it's not as easy as it used to be to get case reports published unless you're willing to put your hand in your pocket and pay for it. Reviews. So actually they're not bad actually. Reviews take a little bit more work, usually 3,000 words, probably, give or take. But actually people don't like writing them. Most people don't like writing them. They're not that popular. And so editors, you know, are often on the lookout for reviews. And although people don't, they're a bit like the opposite of case reports, really. People don't like writing them, but people do like reading them. And people like citing them as well. And so editors quite like reviews, in my experience. And so they're not bad if you wanted to have a go at one. Letters, so they're pretty easy to write. You just, you know, you're flicking through a journal and your breakfast on Saturday morning, you've got a bit of a chance to sit down and read archives or something, or BMJ, and you start reading it and you think, I agree with that, I'm going to write a letter. And so that's not a bad way. There's quite a few people start their publishing careers with letters. That was my first publication many years ago, was a letter. And then there's another quite an easy one to do, is like an image in pediatrics. So you might see, you know, a case and there might be something interesting about it. So for example, recently I had a child who had Hodgkin's lymphoma, and when she presented to Stevens-Johnson syndrome, which isn't well described in the literature. And so we took some pictures of her when she presented, with consent, of course, and then got her consent to write that up and publish it. And it took a little bit of a struggle, but we managed to get into a pediatric dermatology journal. So yeah, and it doesn't take, you know, the picture is a main bit of those sorts of articles, and the writing doesn't take long, so it's usually only a couple hundred words actually. So not difficult to do. And then, you know, you might have journal specific articles. You might think, what do I mean by that? So for example, the BMJ has a number of specific articles that they commission or you can propose. So for example, there's an uncertainties in clinical practice type article. So what that means is it's just an opinion piece or a review where you're not quite sure about the evidence behind something, it might be kind of a bit ambiguous about what you're supposed to do. And so they're quite good. If you have an idea and you know kind of what a journal's after, then that's quite nice for the editors, and they'll often get commissioned and a bit easier to get published. And then lastly, I put this bottom because it's not that easy to do. So the ideal in everything when it comes to publishing is to do some original research and write that up. So if you do a big randomized controlled trial, and across multiple centers, and regardless of what you were to find out with that, I'll give you an example. So let's say we think that giving IM to children might reduce the frequency of febrile seizures. And so we do a randomized controlled trial, and we set that up and we recruit lots and lots of children who have febrile seizures across the country, and we give IM to them, and we look at whether or not that fits in the future. Then chances are you'd be able to get that published somewhere. Yeah, and it'd probably be quite a high impact journal, actually, especially if they had a good outcome. But that'd be really difficult to set up, wouldn't it? If you had no experience of research, then how would that even happen? You'd have to get the money, you'd have to get some time to do it. You'd have to recruit staff, research nurses. You'd have to get all the ethics in place across country. It would take literally, set a trial like that would take the minimum of 3 years, even if you had the funding. And then recruitment and analysing statistics, all that sort of stuff. That's really difficult, isn't it? And so, it's just quite difficult to do research as a clinician who might not have any experience of it. And the same goes for laboratory research if you ever have the opportunity to do that. But you have to work hard at most stuff in terms of basic science. And so, I did my PhD, I did it in basic science in the laboratory, and getting some of that stuff published was just really difficult. It goes out to a journal, they suggest a load of experiments, and you have to go back and do the experiments. It just goes round and round. It's years, that is. And so it's definitely possible to do research, and it's definitely possible to publish that research. But I think if you haven't done it before, as a clinician, it's quite difficult to kind of publish that. And when people think of publishing, they kind of think of that sort of stuff, and that is the best way, that's the best way to get publication, but it's also probably the hardest, I think. So how do you kind of know what to write? So what I'd say is one of the biggest things to do is to keep up with the literature, and to read some journals, and it's not a bad idea. And I think it's something that doctors don't do very much, to be honest. It's not a bad idea just to read a couple of general journals. Pediatrician, archives of disease in childhood is something that all pediatricians in the UK get sent whether they want it or not. And so just having a look through that and seeing what kind of articles are in there. And they have a couple of kind of sister journals. I've got like a fetal and neonatal one and a education and practice one. And so if you look through there and just look at the types of articles that there are, then you'll get an idea of what they want. You get an idea of how to write a publication and what they're kind of interested in. And the same with BMJ. So the two main journals I kind of read generally, if I'm not, looking for something specific in this country, is BMJ and Archives of Disease in Childhood. And so, that's a way to get an idea of how to publish, the idea of how to write, an idea of how, what editors are after. You need to read what's published. It's very unlikely you're just going to be able to think of an idea and then have no idea where to send it. It's like you need to be familiar with what's out there. And then what I'd say that if somebody gives you an opportunity, you need to take it. So not uncommonly, people will say, I'll give you an example. So when I started as an SHO in Sheffield, and there's a consultant there, and he said,
okay, does it look like a viral kind of threat?
Hello?
Yeah. So if
sorry, I just heard something, but it's gone now. So so in terms of so somebody gives you an opportunity to take it. So for example, so when I started as an SHO, there was a consultant there, and he said, I've got this little case series of kind of stereotactic radiosurgery and relapsed medulloblastoma. And he said, I've got like some of it's been done, but not that much of it. And, you know, do you want to take it on and try and get published? And then I said, yes, okay, fine. You know, I'm keen, young person, interested in research, interested in getting stuff published. And so you go away. I mean, it takes a bit of effort to do that. But then, you know, you publish that, and then you get, after, you know, it goes backwards and forwards around a few journals, but you get it published eventually. And then, you know, and then that consultant will remember that. And then the next time there's something, they'll say, oh, you know, I've got this idea, you know, do you want to do this? And then, you know, you can get a little collaboration going. Whereas if you didn't do anything, if you said, yeah, I'll take it on, and then you didn't do anything, then chances are you might get a name for yourself, someone who doesn't complete stuff. So it's much better to have one thing, finish it, and then move on to the next thing. And so, you know, that's what I'd recommend. If somebody gives you an opportunity, you need to take it and see it through. And that can be the start of something. And then when it comes to kind of deciding where to publish, then there's a kind of hierarchy. And this is more particularly important if you're an academic and you're applying for grants and trying to keep your academic position at the university. But I don't know if this is kind of common knowledge amongst clinicians, I suppose. So you can think of it, if you follow football, and most people are aware of football in the United Kingdom, an international sport when it is. So you can think of it as, you know, Premier League journals, things like the New England Journal of Medicine, you've probably heard of it, Nature, the BMJ, and what they have is they have something called an impact factor. And what the impact factor is it's essentially the number of times that an article in that journal will be cited by another article on average over the last 2 years. So if you publish something in the New England Journal of Medicine, it'll get cited about 54 times a year, which is great, isn't it? Yeah, that's great. And Nature's about 42, and the BMJ has an impact factor recently of about 16. So they're the kind of Premier League journals, and people talk about impact factor and moan about it and how it's not a good indicator and all this stuff, but to be honest, people still like it. And then you've got something like the Archives of Disease of Childhood, and, you know, I think of that very much as a championship journal, and that's got an impact factor of about 2.9. And then you've got, you know, this is more kind of lower league stuff. And I don't want to cast slights on the Sudanese football team, but I don't think they've been to the World Cup yet. No, I think the Sudanese football team would be more championship, to be honest. But the Blue Square Bet Premier is, you know, a very much a lower league thing, and that was my first article, the relapsed medulloblastoma stereotactic radiosurgery. So I managed to get it into the Journal of Pediatric. So it's got a soft spot in my heart, this journal, but let's face it, it's got an impact factor of 0.9. It gets cited on average 0.9 times a year. Slightly better actually than that, but not much. So yeah. So there's a range of different journals, and, you know, all these actually are fine. All these journals are fine to publish in, and most people don't know the difference between it, do they? Just say publication to publication. But if you're an academic, you know kind of what each of those are, and it's much more difficult to get something published in, you know, the New England Journal of Medicine. That's going to be your big RCT looking at febrile seizures and iron replacement, whereas the Journal of Pediatric Hematology, you might just be able to get a little case series in there. And then there's another thing which has kind of come in over the last, I mean, it's been a while now, to be honest. Probably been like the last 10 years. And this was like the original open access journal was POS thing. And so all these people, you know, got together and they said, well, you know, science is a bit broken, isn't it? And I'll talk about this a little bit later, but science is a little bit broken. And so what we'll do is we'll set a journal up, we'll make it online, and anything which is of good enough quality will get published in that journal. We will not have a limit on what we publish. And that's PLOS, essentially. And yeah, and there's all different kind of, that was PLOS 1, which is the first one, but then you've got PLOS Medicine, all these different things. And the only downside of that is in order to support the business model, you have to pay. You have to put your hand in your pocket and pay to get it published. And that's usually around about, nowadays, about £1,000, £1,200, 1,200 sterling. Whereas all these journals, you don't have to pay to publish it. However, all these journals will put it behind a paywall. So you either have to subscribe to a journal or be a member of a university or NHS Athens, whatever. You have to have some way of accessing that. It won't be available on the internet, whereas all the PLOS stuff is freely available. So everything on PLOS, you can Google it and it's there. And so what that means actually is that PLOS, which some people look down on in the scientific community, would you believe? What that means is actually, people do read their stuff and they do cite it as well. And it doesn't have that high an impact factor, but that's probably a reflection of how much they publish, because they don't limit the number of articles. So it's all right. I'm not, it's fine. It's just, it's not what you start off with, PLOS usually. And then amongst those journals, you've got a whole list of what are termed predatory journals, and they're basically a bit like PLOS, except instead of wanting to further the world of science, they want to line their own pockets, and so they'll publish literally anything. It doesn't matter as long as you pay. There's almost no kind of peer review, and there's no kind of standard setting. If you want to get something published, then you can do whatever you want, and they'll publish it, which is obviously not a great thing. And so and there's loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of these journals, and if you ever write anything, then you have to put your email address in, submit it, and that's usually published online, and then various bots will comb the internet, and then they'll get your details, and then you'll get emails every day asking you to publish in made-up journals. You can freely access the journal online, and so that's quite a big problem actually, predatory journals. So you just need to be careful of that. And so if you get an email saying, the first time you do it, you're quite flattered. First one you get, you're like, we often say, with your expertise in the area, etc. We read your journal articles, nice. No one normally reads them. But actually, what happens is they'll say, we want you to publish something, and then you could go to the effort of writing something, and they'll say, that's very nice, thank you, can I have £2,500 please in order to publish it? So and then they'll just put it up as, obviously it's just a load of rubbish essentially. So steer clear of the predatory journals. If you're interested, you can Google it and you'll find out about all the different ones out there, and why it's a problem. So in terms of tips for managing, if you're thinking of writing something, I've got some tips for manuscript preparation essentially. So you've got an idea, you put it together, and then you want to write your manuscript. So here's some tips. So the first thing is, a lot of people will start with a case report early on in their career, a publishing career, and you might see an interesting case, and you might think, I think that'll do really well in a journal somewhere, archives. They like images, for example, so publish it in there. And so if you see a patient, you think, do you know what, that could be quite an interesting case report, potentially. Then the thing to do is to get consent early, because what's really difficult is if you don't do that. So once I was supervising a medical student, and she wrote a nice little article, and it wasn't an article, it was like an assignment that she had to do, and I said, oh yeah, this could be published, do you want to write it up? And she was like, yes, of course. And it took about 18 months to do it. And one of the stumbling blocks was the fact we had to get consent from family, because obviously we hadn't taken consent at the time. And she ended up driving all the way to Doncaster. And people may not know where Doncaster is, but it's nowhere near Sheffield. It's about 40 minutes away, driving. And she had to go and knock on the door and ask the family to consent for this journal article, which is a lot more difficult than asking them when you see them. So if you think it's got a chance of getting published, then it's much easier just to get consent. You sign something usually. Get off the internet, whichever journal you're interested in, or you can just get a generic consent form, just get them to sign it. It's really difficult to do it. Another kind of important thing is just make sure you follow the author guidelines. So if you ever think, I want to write something, I want to write a review article. I want to write a review article on, the experience of being a Sudanese paediatrician working in the United Kingdom healthcare system. I'm going to write a review article about that. Then what you need to do is you need to go away and you think, oh, well, I found this journal, which is ideal. It's exactly, it's like a medical education journal or medical training journal, whatever. And then what you need to do is you need to go away and they'll have on the website, they'll have exactly how you write the article. So there might be like an introduction, there might be like an overview, might be literature search, whatever, references, all that sort of stuff. And what you need to do is follow that in order to publish it. Because otherwise, if you don't follow the author guidelines, you'll submit it and it'll just get bounced back by one of them production editors, which is always annoying. So make sure you follow the author guidelines. And the other thing is they're usually quite good for just telling you what type of articles they like to publish. And then if you think, you've got a journal, you want to publish it, just flick through the journal beforehand and just see how other people have written the articles, and then make sure you kind of follow the same sort of style, stick to the house style. And every journal is slightly different in that sense. I think one tip I would give people writing stuff, if you ever get seriously into writing, like trying to publish stuff or whatever, research, whatever, just learn how to use a reference manager. So if you don't know what that is, it's essentially, it's like EndNote is the most common one, but other brands are available. And what it does is it's essentially, it'll just collect all the references for you, and then it saves them all, and then you insert them, and it's like a program which enables you to do that. And then when you want to change the style of the reference, you just click a button and that's it. If you don't do that, it's almost impossible to write stuff. It's like it's getting to a point nowadays where it's really difficult to publish something unless you don't know how to use a reference manager. So when I started my publishing career way back when, then the consultant who I told you about with that Goldacre thing, he knew how to use reference manager, but I didn't. So I used to send the stuff to him in order for him to change it. But obviously when you do a PhD and a bit before that, and I learned how to use it, and it doesn't take long to use. It's like a librarian can show you how to do it. It's easier, just if you ever write anything, it's easier. I just use everything I write now, I just use EndNote. But it's really difficult to publish without it, because every journal has a different requirement for references, and it's impossible to do that manually. I would say it's almost impossible to do it manually. And then you need to write. So the way it works is you get your article together, follow the guidelines, make sure it kind of follows a house style. And then you have to write a letter and covering letter. And once you've written a few of them, you know what to say. But essentially, it's just saying, attached is my article. It's interesting for this reason. It appeals to this journal for this reason. I'd be very grateful. I'm grateful for your thoughts on it. And then occasionally you have to kind of recommend peer reviewers. So if it's something which is quite niche, so let's say my PhD was on the DNA damage response in neuroblastoma, which sounds niche, doesn't it? And so you can't just expect a general pediatrician down the road to review that and understand what's happening. So editors often want you to recommend peer reviewers, which can be good sometimes if you get your friends involved. Not your friends, but people you've met before, and you think, it might give us a nice review. So that can be beneficial. So if they suggest peer reviewers, make sure you suggest them, and it's helpful not to know them. They can't it can't be a friend who does it, but it could be somebody professionally, and sometimes that can be good. And then just make sure you submit it, and that's goes back to my original point. The reason a lot of publications fail is because people don't submit them, and you're not going to get something published unless you submit it. So make sure you submit. And then if you do that, you submit your article, then almost everything nowadays gets peer reviewed. So even a case report will get peer reviewed, an image will get peer reviewed by someone. And the way I think of peer review, and I've been on both sides of this. I've done peer reviews for some prestigious journals as well, which is surprising, and BMJ amongst others. This sums up best how I think of peer review. So you send your manuscript off, it's nice and clean, you think it's perfect, no problem at all. And then, after peer review, this is what it looks like, to be honest. You get this list of comments back, and half the time I haven't even read it properly. I haven't even understood it. You think, what is the point of peer review? Just a total waste of time. It's a joke. Once, if you publish something, then after if you publish 2 or 3 things, you'll get invited to a peer reviewer, and you'll be like, how can I be in a position to peer review? But you're the expert suddenly. I'm the expert. I don't feel like an expert, but I suppose I am. And so this is what happens. You just end up, with all this stuff, you have to expand the introduction discussion. You need more, an N of 3 just isn't good enough anymore. You need an N of 5, let's just add some other stuff that the reviewer 3 likes. You need to just use this different experiment because, that's what other people do. You need to use this new technique, and there's just some minor revisions there, just make sure that you kind of paragraph it properly and change the spelling of this and that. And it just ends up completely unrecognizable. That is almost exactly what happened. The first paper from my PhD, it was fine. There's nothing wrong with it. We sent it to a few good journals actually, and it nearly got into them. It didn't. It kind of fell just at the last hurdle. And by the end, it was just completely unrecognizable. I had 2 years work on it. It's ridiculous. Peer review. And so if you want to know, you might think, well, what do peer reviewers say? And so one thing that has happened, which is good actually, is that kind of peer review. It used to just be a closed shop. You didn't even know who did it. And so you send it off double blind peer review. You wouldn't know who was, you don't know who's reviewing it, and they don't know your name of the person who wrote the article. And it's kind of been recognised that maybe that can lead to some issues. So you can guess who's written it, and then if you were kind of competing against them for grants or whatever that might give you a less favourable review. And so certain journals, BMJ sort of led on this, to be honest, and they've said, well, what we'll do is we'll publish peer reviews, like every peer review of every research article that we publish. And so they don't do it in the journal, but on the website you can go away and you can click on peer review and the peer review box here, and you can see exactly what the peer review is like. And it is, I'd recommend that you do it, to be honest. If you ever read an interesting article, like a big article, whatever, I can't think of anything that's been in BMJ recently, but one of those, and then you just think, oh, well, actually, I'll just go away and I'll just see what the peer reviewers thought, and you click on it and read it, and it just shows you exactly what the process is like. And then you get your decision on your manuscript. Once it's been through peer review, send it back, get a decision. And the decision is you either accept it, which almost never happens. So you submit something, chances of getting accepted without any revisions is, after peer review, is just incredibly unlikely. I've never, ever had it happen. And then what's much more common is you get rejected with minor revisions. And that can be, worded in slightly different ways. It can be like, you're happy to accept your article, providing you meet these minor revisions, or we have considered your article and we will consider it again if you do this. And they're basically pretty much the same. Minor revisions, nothing wrong with minor revisions. You're in, your foot's in the door, you just need to do a little bit more work. It's in, pretty much. Reject with major revisions, now that's an issue. Reject with major revisions is a kind of, I had that with my PhD papers, both of them actually. And that's like, we'll consider it again, but we want you to do a load of we want you to do 6 months of work on it, and then we'll put it through the same peer review process. There's no guarantee we're going to accept it. And that is, you're sort of obliged to go away and have a go at it. Your option there is either go to a different journal, although you've already invested some time submitting to that journal, or you can try to go at trying to do major revisions. And really, it's a judgment call as to kind of what we've asked for and whether you think it's realistic or, whether it's feasible really in terms of time and money. And then reject, sad when it's rejected. You need to grow you need to have a strong backbone when it comes to publishing, and every single person who's published anything will have had stuff rejected lots of times, and it's just the way it goes. And if I reject it, then often the way it works is that they can reject it without even sending it out for peer review. You can just say reject, gone, not even thanks very much submitting, we don't consider it appropriate for our journal, I'm not going to send it out for peer review. Getting its peer review is like halfway there, but even then they might reject it. And if they do, you just need to choose another journal. If you want to carry on trying to get it published, you choose another journal. There's always another journal available. And if it's been out for peer review, then you can have a think about whether you change it. I mean, I have to be honest, I don't bother half the time, just send it out somewhere else. Peer reviewers will say something different if you choose different ones. So, and it doesn't mean anything, it's like the one I was telling you about, the stereotype razor, one of the first ones I published, a case series. It's like that got rejected first. Pediatric Blood and Cancer, which is like, it's like, you know, a journal above the one I got it published in. And they just rejected it. I think it went out for peer review. We just said it wasn't good enough. And then we sent it to the next one, and they loved it. They lapped it up. So, you know, you just can't tell sometimes. And sometimes people will get stuff rejected from a kind of lower impact journal, get into a higher impact. So it's not, you know, it's not the end of the world. But yeah, you have to submit somewhere else if you want to get published. So I just thought I'd talk a little bit about kind of the way I think publishing is going, because I don't think it's going to stay the same. You know, I think 50 years time, I think it'll look very different. I think, you know, I don't know, like whether it'll still be important for your career in 50 years time, but, you know, I think things are changing, largely related to the internet, really. And so the first thing is that just over the last 5 years, I'd say, this has become a thing, where it used to be that if you wanted to do a research study, you kind of had to, you know, raise the money yourself, write a protocol, collect the data, analyze the data, write up. You know, you were doing most of that work yourself. And something that's really kind of come in over the last 5 years, and there's certain people who are really good at this, just really good at it, and it tends to be particularly people who are interested in surgery, and people in specifically who are interested in neurosurgery. And so you've got F1 and F2s who are publishing. We've got more publications than me. We've got higher impact. You know, we've got better impact publications than me. We've got like more citations than me. And the way they're doing it is through collaborative studies. And so what happens is, you know, somebody will set an international cohort study up, for example, on COVID and the impact of COVID on operations, say, and so how many operations are cancelled, and then they'll identify someone at each hospital in the United Kingdom and around the world, and they'll get them to do the registration of the hospital, and then they'll submit, you know, 20 cases or 30 cases or whatever of whatever they're looking at, but, you know, how delayed surgery was because of COVID. And then, as you know, the sweetener for the person doing that work is they'll say, well, what you'll be a co-author on the study. You'll be there, named author. It'll count. And so all you have to do is register the study. We'll send you all the data. We'll send you all the documentation to register it, and then you do that, and then you submit the data, and then you'll be a named author on it. And so and that's become like quite a big thing now, I think. So, you know, certainly kind of when you're even medical students or F1s or F2s, it's not that difficult to do. And so if there was someone on this, so you're all pediatricians, yeah, there are a few kind of pediatric collaborations in emergency medicine, and nothing as well as established as these. And this is like kind of like an easy way when you're a medical student, particularly to kind of, you know, to start it off, and that's what people are doing. And, you know, you can get 5 or 6 kind of, you know, reasonably high impact, you know, all sorts of things are published in these places. And then this is just, so that's like one example of it. And then there's this other one. So it's just this guy is interested in neurosurgery, and Oxford set this up, and it's just an illustration basically of how things are changing. And so they basically just, medical students know that, you know, to get on in their career, please publish. And so what do they know about? We know about medical education. So write about what you know. That's my tip. And that's what they did. And so they just collected a load of medical students from across the country, register each medical school, get them to submit data on kind of how COVID's impacted their education or whatever, write it up. That's what people did. And so, you know, these collaborative studies are becoming a thing, I think, and it's just, so it is a way to get involved in research, to be honest, if you don't have that much time. And then another way I think that kind of publishing is changing, and this is quite nicely illustrated by this girl, Greta Thunberg, who, let's face it, she's not a climate scientist. She hasn't done any work on climate change at all, but she speaks and people listen. And the reason for that, there's multiple reasons for that, but it's primarily because she's got a good message and she says it strongly. And you might think, well, how is that related to publishing in medicine? But actually, there are doctors now who will, you know, have an area of interest, and they will talk about it in certain ways, either on social media or however, talks, and that becomes their thing. So Greta Thunberg's thing is climate change. That's what she's known for. And so whereas Ross Fisher, who's a surgeon Sheffield Children's Hospital, his thing is presentations. And so he's never, as far as I'm aware, hasn't published loads of articles on it in the medical literature. But what he has done is he's had a blog, is active on Twitter, and and that that becomes his thing. And so he gets invited all over the world now to do presentations about how to give presentations. Whereas, and that's not based on being published. That's because he's used other ways to kind of communicate that message. And there is kind of a way. So this guy, Damien, he had a blog as well. He's in Leicester, a paediatrician in Leicester, and he kept a blog for a while. And so, you don't have to, it's kind of changing a little bit. There's probably more engagement with these than there are with a lot of the journal articles that are written, and people still know who these people are, and they still read it, and they still, have the potential to affect change. And then this is just, excuse me, this is just kind of something else which is quite interesting, I think. And so, traditionally, when it came to journal articles, you used to say, in terms of measuring impact, how do you define impact? Well, impact is how you affect change. So you might do an RCT, and then the question is, will that be read by lots of people? Will that be talked about by lots of people? Ultimately, will it affect the way that people practice medicine? And the way you used to judge that was by, essentially how many citations it got. That was like the only way to assess it. And nowadays, there's kind of like new ways, and there's this autometric score, which is attached to journal articles. And so what it is, it's just a combination of lots of different things. And so, and then they kind of amalgamate all these different things together. So how much is it covered in the press, an article? How much is it mentioned in a blog? How much is it mentioned on Twitter? How much is it mentioned on Facebook? How much people talking about it, basically? How much kind of, how much publicity is this article getting, and across different ways? And then you can put all that together and get an autometric score. And this is one thing, that kind of is being used to judge impact much more than it used to be nowadays. And so it's not just about impact factor anymore. And there can be articles which are published in what would be perceived as lower ranking journals, which have a high autometric score because they're picked up by the press or whatever. And and it's just a way to kind of increase, or just a way to measure kind of how covered your publication was. Most things will have an autometric score of 2 or 3, whereas like the big things, the big RCTs or the big COVID vaccine study, if you Google autometric score for the kind of the first COVID vaccine study published in New England Journal of Medicine, the Pfizer vaccine, then that will have an autometric score. It'll be like 20,000 or something. Honestly, it'll be ridiculous. And then the other thing that's kind of changing about publishing is it's just people are trying to make it more transparent and just more equitable, I suppose. And so it used to be that kind of, people would run clinical trials, and, you could set a clinical trial up in your hospital, and you might finish it, or you might not finish it, or you might finish it and think, actually, what, the results are rubbish, I'm not going to publish it, they're not positive. And people realized that this became an issue. And so Ben Goldacre, who's, you might have heard of, he's written a few popular books, but essentially a psychiatrist by trade, and then he kind of got involved in clinical trials and making things more open. And so essentially set up somewhere where encourage people to kind of register clinical trials prospectively. And now it's like you can't run a research, you can't run any study, doesn't matter how small it is, without prospectively registering it. And obviously the benefits of registering something are well known. It means that you avoid duplication, you're more likely to report your results. It means that you can't hide negative results. Lots of benefits to registering, but it is a pain. So that's like another thing that's kind of come around in the last 10 years probably. And then the last thing is kind of the last thing to mention is that the whole, it is recognized that the whole kind of academic scene is just a bit, it's just unfair, really. Unjust. So for example, something like Nature Publishing Company, which is just a publishing company, at the end of the day. then they kind of, what happens is you write an article, you send it off to Nature, then they take the copyright off you, so you don't have a copyright anymore, and then they charge people to read the work that you did that was probably publicly funded or funded by a charity. I mean, it's just a joke. And so people, have been kicking waves about this for a little bit now, for a few years at least, saying this just isn't fair. Why should Nature Publishing Company be allowed to make profits off publicly funded work and then put it behind a paywall? It's just completely unjust. And so there is a bit of a move away from that, and the kind of open access model is one way around that. And then even more, like, people think, oh, is this a future? Is this a future of not of opinion pieces, not of editorials, but of proper, scientific work is maybe what we should say. And this is a preprint service. So what you do is you do your study, you don't put it out for peer review, you just upload it on here. And then what happens is you've got a discussion box underneath, and then people read it and they'll say, well, actually, I don't like this about your study, I don't like that about your study, what about this, what about that? And so you kind of have this kind of process of peer review, which is continuing, which is kind of live and active, and it allows discussion. And this is entirely, without profit. This is just to get stuff out there. And this became really this was a thing before COVID, but during COVID, when you had all those, all those studies kind of coming out, all the the early kind of recovery trial stuff, steroids, for example, they were all published as preprints first, because it was just a way just to get it out there, and let people read it without having to wait, first of all, for the journals to do it, and also because it meant it was freely accessible, it wasn't behind a paywall. And so this is something that's kind of becoming bigger and bigger, and a lot of people now, if you write a nice study, you'll publish a preprint. And then sometimes what happens is if it's a really good preprint, if it's a really good study, then first of all, it kind of puts people off doing copying. It kind of stops people from getting ahead of you because you've already put it out there. And second of all, sometimes journals have just come around and they'll read the preprints and say, well, would you like to submit this journal article? Would you like to submit this article to our journal? And we'll publish it. But yeah, and that can happen with quite prestigious journals. So I've heard. It's not happened for me yet, but it can happen. So I thought I'd just finish with kind of a story just to illustrate really kind of how you can get stuff published. And this was when I was young, and just I hadn't published a lot at this stage, published maybe 4 or 5 things. And I was a first year registrar. I wasn't, when I wrote this article, I was first year registrar. When I published it, I'd taken up an academic position by then, but when I wrote it, I was an ST4, so it's like a first year reg in the UK essentially, so a relatively junior doctor. And so what happened was I was just listening, just to talk you through how it happened. So I was just listening to Radio 5. I was driving home to see my girlfriend, now wife at the time, she's my girlfriend, and she used to live in Sheffield, which is where I'm based now, and I used to, at the time, live in Grimsby, which is about 70 miles away, so it was a long drive. And I was driving there, and it was about 20 past 11 at night, and I was listening to Radio 5 live, and I just heard this discussion, and essentially they were just talking about a device that had just been developed, and you can put it on babies, and essentially what it does is it enables you to measure the saturations of normal babies and send it to your smartphone. That's what they're talking about. And so there's a company in America that developed this, and they're all sitting around. It was like a panel, like a sort of panel thing, and they're having a discussion about how great this device was, and how it was like, it was like a revolution for parents everywhere, and it would be really helpful, kind of, to prevent any sort of illnesses, or and if a baby developed health problems, and you'd know straight away. And it was fantastic, and that's essentially what they were saying. And I was just listening to that, and I just thought, that sounds like a load of rubbish, doesn't it? That just sounds like a load of rubbish. And I thought, we wouldn't normally send it, like, even just from your own experience, but if you send home a baby from the neonatal unit, you don't send them home with SATS monitor. Even the sick ones, very unusual to send them home with SATS monitor. It doesn't happen very often, not in the UK anyway. I just thought, I wonder what the evidence is for that. I wonder how much it's been actually looked into. And so I was just, I was just sitting there, and I was just thinking about it for a few days, and I thought, you know what, I'm gonna write something about this. And so I Googled it, wearable devices, baby. Why not? Just Google it, see what happens. And then I thought, I'll write something. I've got an idea here. Why not see where it goes? And so I kind of found out companies who produce these things, and then I thought, well, I'll try and interview them all in America. So set up an interview, said, I'm interested in writing this article, and so I managed to interview them and ask them about it, and then did a little bit of reading around it. And it wasn't a long article; it was about 1,500 words in the end, 1,500, 2,000 words. And I thought, where should I send it? And I thought, why not? Why not aim high? Why not go for the BMJ? It's exactly the sort of thing they'd be interested in, because if you read the BMJ, you kind of know what they publish, and they kind of like these kind of controversial things, And it's just, I thought, it'd be a good fit for the BMJ. And the only reason I knew it was a good fit for the BMJ was because I'd read the BMJ before. I thought, send it off to the BMJ. And I knew like the kind of type of article which would be good for. It's like a personal view or like a media thing. And then so I sent it off, and it took me a while to get back to me, like 4, 5, 6 months, something like that. And while that was happening, I was thinking, God, I hope somebody else doesn't publish this in the meantime. And so they said, and it was an interesting thing what he said actually. He said, thanks for sending your article. Pleased to make a provisional offer of acceptance and discuss a piece with my colleagues and our lawyer. So that's interesting. You don't see that very often when you send stuff off. But anyway, so then they said, they wanted some stuff changing, as they always do. So I made a change, and then it got accepted. That's very good. Excellent. Another publication, another line on the CV. And then just while I was waiting, so the way it works is you send it off, gets published, and then you usually get like an email, and they say, your article's been or whatever, and it'll be in the print on this thing. And I was like, you don't get stuff published in BMJ very often. I was quite happy with that. And then I got an email from them. They said, we're very pleased to tell you that your article's going to be press released. And I was like, that is good. Didn't really know what that meant. And then and so like they sent this email to you and said, we're going to press release this, and be prepared that you may have to do interviews about your article that you've written. And so it was published, and by then I was clinical literature and pediatrics. Actually, when I wrote it, I was just a registrar. 31 I was. And when you get something press released, it turns out the way the press works internationally is that they just copy what the press release says. And so BMJ press released it essentially, and then all these big public, big proper mainstream newspapers pick it up, and so suddenly it was in the Mail Online, and it was in the Independent, and it was even covered in like Time magazine. Smart babe, modest, don't protect your SIDS. UK professor, they didn't check to see what I was, but fine, whatever. And so all this kind of press came out, and then obviously the companies had to kind of put a disclaimer on their website saying that it doesn't, these monitors don't actually have any proven health benefits. They're just a gimmick, essentially. Charging, by the way, £300 or something. That's how much they cost, which is why it annoyed me a little bit. And then the last thing that kind of happened with this is that a group in America kind of read all this stuff and thought, well, what we'll do is we'll have a look at the accuracy of these kind of commercial devices, and we'll compare it to normal pulse oximetry. And then they wrote all that up and published it on the back of what I did. And I managed to get that into JAMA, which is obviously a reasonable journal article. So that all came from just listening to the radio and just thinking, do you know what, that'd be quite a nice article to write. And so what I'd say to you is people are interested. That's my experience, is that people are interested in what you've got to say. Everyone's got something. Everyone's got an opinion, and everyone's got something to say. And you're all kind of, you've all got a lot of knowledge and experience, different life experiences, and that means that you can write a whole range of different things. And if you talk with authenticity and from a place of experience, then people are interested. Definitely, the world is definitely listening. That's like the catchphrase for the Grammy Awards. But I think it's true for medical publishing. People are interested in what you've got to say. So if you've got an idea about something to write, then I would strongly encourage you to write it. And that is the end of my talk.
Thank you, Dr. King, for this intriguing talk. You really made the process of publication looks easy for us, though it might be a very difficult process. For the sake of time, we'll allow for questions, maybe 2 to 3 minutes for each question.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Your hand and we'll allow you to unmute yourself.
Please post. Yeah, okay. So, which citation manager program do you suggest? So, the one I'm most familiar with is EndNote. The problem with EndNote is that you have to pay for it, unless you have like you can. So where I got my EndNote was where I used to work for university, and so you could just they made a range of software, free to download, and so that's what I use, and that's what I'm most familiar with. But I know there are other ones. So EndNote's the one I'm most familiar with. The downside is you have to pay for it. There's something else called, I think there's something else called RefWorks or something like that. And I think they're all pretty much the same. So there are free ones, but I just don't have much experience and I've just never learned how to use them. Most people choose one citation manager and then stick with it.
Any other questions?
Sorry.
Thank you.
And then it says, how would you rate publication of abstracts at a conference in their corresponding journal? So, if I'm honest with you, it's kind of like, I think, I've been to a few conferences in my life and discussed things. And I think the main benefit of going to a conference is to meet people and collaborate, like if I'm honest with you, and to get an idea of kind of the stuff that's going to be published. And so people will often present their work that's going to be published. And so it's just a good idea to kind of keep up with the field, because publication, the medical literature tends to lag a couple of years behind what's actually being done, certainly in basic science and probably, in clinical medicine as well. And so, you have to go to conferences to know what's happening. But in terms of kind of abstracts of a conference, I mean, most conferences, they aren't stringent in terms of accepting abstracts, because they know that if people submit abstracts, are much more likely, if they accept an abstract, that person who submitted it is much more likely to attend the conference, and there is this kind of conflict of interest. And so the majority of abstracts that get submitted will get accepted. And then, in terms of like, if they choose to publish those abstracts, and most, a lot of journals do have like books of abstracts. I think the reality is most people don't read those. It's not going to get read a lot. So it's, in terms of publications, it's in no way comparable. People won't be able, in terms of the impact of your work, people might talk to you at the conference, and that's what it's good for, these kind of future collaborations or getting suggestions about how to improve something. But, in the real world, kind of getting abstracts published isn't difficult. It's a good start, definitely, if you haven't published anything before. But it's like most people don't read them. And if you publish a poster, it's like, if you ever presented a poster at a conference, it's like, it's like you're trying to be a salesperson, but no one's interested. It's just like almost no one reads it. A couple, like one or two people, you go to a conference of 1,000 people, 2 people will be interested in your poster. If you're lucky. That's my experience. So, yeah. So, all right. It's not just listening to radio, it's listening to critical questioning minds. I think that is true. But at the same time, it's like, I think everybody does that. I think everybody's got, you've all kind of got the potential to do that, and kind of think, well, actually, what is the evidence base behind something? What about this? Why are we doing this way? And there's always the opportunity to do that. Thank you. Can a person who do data management and final editing with one of the paper's authors? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Can a person who do data management and final editing with one of the paper authors, even if you didn't participate in the research? Well, I think, if you collect the data, then you are like, if that's the agreement, they'll put you on as an author. There is kind of like author criteria, But do people stick with that? I'll give you an example. So Lord Darcy, who people may have heard of, so he used to be like a Labour peer, very high up in government, and he runs a very kind of research active, runs a big group down in London, mainly sort of interested in robotics in surgery. And so Lord Darcy publishes on average about one paper a week. It's like, well, how on earth could he have had that much input into one paper a week? Given that I've published, in my career, I've published probably about, between 35 and 40 times. And, in my PhD, which I spent 4 years doing, I got 2 papers out of it. So that's like one every 2 years. And he's publishing one a week. Are you telling me that he is contributing meaningfully? I'll just put his name on it because I know it's easy to get published. It's like, that's the reality. It's like everyone does it. So there's author criteriaship, but no one follows it and the journals don't care. So yeah, you can definitely be published even if you don't write it. You can move mine over in a word of the manuscript, and you can still be an author on it. What's the likelihood of local audits getting published? I mean, I think it's just be incredibly challenging. It depends what it was. I suppose you can, there is kind of a mechanism to get local audits published in certain journals. So, for example, Education and Practice, which is the sort of Archive of Disease in Child, or the RCPCH journal, like they have like a kind of article thing where you can talk about how practice has changed locally, and talk through how you did it and do that as like an education thing. But getting a local audit published is almost impossible in a proper journal. It just won't be good enough quality. That's the reality. That's the sort of stuff you present somewhere, to be honest. And we're just talking about CPD. Sometimes you struggle to find the right topic from the start. What do you suggest? So I think, what I'd say is you need to write about what you know, don't you? Everyone knows about something, and if you want to write something, you just have to do what you're interested in, and what you know about, and everybody has got the potential, I think, to write something, which isn't that helpful, is it? But that's the truth. And so what I'd say is read the journals, read what's out there. Always keep thinking and just think, could I write something about this? Could I publish that? And once you start, you can do it. I promise you, it's not that difficult. And, that's what people do. People start off and they publish once or twice, and then it becomes a game for some people. They love publishing. I quite like publishing. It's nice, nice to see your name in print. It's nice to educate people. It's nice if people read it, engage with it. It's a nice aspect of your career, I think. And so, have a go is what I'd say. Right, that's all the questions. Anything else? Any other questions or comments? I don't think so.
No, I can't see any further questions here.
Okay, so if no more questions, I would like, on behalf of the ABCH, I would like to thank Dr. King again. Thank you for your time and this intriguing and amazing talk, and wish to see you in the future again in the session. I would like to thank also all the audience for their contribution and their time. And it would be great if you can fill the feedback forms for us, which would be very helpful and useful for us. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Farewell then, Hani. Farewell.
Brilliant talk. See you at the hospital.
Indeed. All right. Take care.
As usual, yeah.
I'll leave. End the meeting. Shall I end the meeting?